All right, welcome to episode 2 of season 2 of the Western Wisconsin Sports Podcast. You will have some music leading in this time. I totally forgot about that. So you're going to have that, episode 2. I'm Jeremy Nygaard. That's Jordan Lehman. Jordan, how you doing?
Good, really good. Episode 2 is a exciting one, previewing the boys. Obviously, we did the girls MBC Middle Board Conference last time, doing the boys part of that, and then also just highlighting some teams in the region that might be a part of different conferences like the Big Rivers. Will be a lot of fun. So let's get into it.
Yeah, so one thing right now, we're recording. It's shortly after 7 on Thursday night. Every team in the Middle Border, I think with the exception of Ellsworth, is tipping off now. And I think only Prescott's played a game at this point. So basically this is the opener. We're not hosting, and we're here, and we're going to try to go through the conference. So Jordan, where do you want to start in the Middle Border this year?
So the way we did the girls, I thought was smart, where we kind of had a couple, we kind of looked at the teams that could compete for a conference title and then looked at some of the teams that have a ways to go. And I would, I have a pretty good idea, I think, of where I'm at with that. We could start kind of at the bottom again. And my pick would be Amory to be kind of the one team that I don't think that there's a alternate universe where they, win more than a handful of games in conference this year. All due respect to their, the newest addition, Coach Sargent. He has a spectacular career record. Absolutely dominated at Clear Lake for almost a decade, winning tons of games, winning tons of conference titles, going to state. I believe that they're going to turn things around under him. I think I don't think what he did at Clear Lake was a coincidence. I think he's going to do some really nice things at Amory. But going through Amory's last handful of years, there really aren't a ton of highlights in the sense of positives. It's been a lot of losing, and that's a hard thing to turn around. That's a really hard thing to turn around. And so, right. They're the one team that I really don't know that they're going to compete well in the conference, which is harsh, but it's also just that where I think they're at.
Right. And so Sarge has been obviously at Clear Lake, and he's won 290 career games. So it's not that this is his first, second, or 17th rodeo. I mean, he's been doing this 463 varsity games. So we're talking over 20 years. But yeah, based on what we've seen from Amory in the recent past, there's just not a lot there. They lose 3 starters from last year, from a team that was a 3-win team. There is allegedly a freshman that's a pretty good player. And I don't know, obviously they're playing Colfax tonight, but I would anticipate, if he's as good as what I've heard, that he'll get some significant time. And the weird thing with Amory is they have athletes in their building. Mm-hmm. So it's not that they're, void of athletic talent. It's just the most talented athletes are playing a different sport. And so I think, with Sarge there, and obviously having a history of developing a program, obviously, that Amory's, it's the trajectory is going up, right?
Right.
But it's impossibly difficult to take a program over and just turn things over in 1 year when you, in the high school level, where you don't get to recruit guys, right? And so much of that starts with the attitude that these kids have. And when you've won 3 games last year, it was it 0 wins as recently as 2 years ago? Mm-hmm. There's just not a lot of winning that's happened for these kids. And they have, I watched their 7th grade team, and they were okay. So I think there's the work is cut out for Sarge, but obviously he knows that. And at some point in time, we'll get him on here again and talk to him.
Yeah. Yeah, and Amory's, people, I had the unique privilege of having I have a dad that really enjoys high school basketball, and he would bring me to games when I was 5, 6. And so I remember when they were not only relevant, but a dominant force in the conference. There's people that might not be keyed into that, but it's not necessarily not a basketball school. But it really hasn't been for the last 5, 10 years. And so it's all it takes is a group of guys and a leader like Sarge to do that. And I think if we were to be back here in 5 years and they were a team that's competing to win conference, that would be awesome. Like you said, it's a huge task, but a guy that's coached high school basketball over 40 times in a varsity setting, he's the guy for it. And so Amy, yeah, like I just don't know that they're gonna, pull out a lot of wins. Hopefully they compete well and keep the conference, just kind of keep the conference at a competitive level night in and night out. And honestly, next up for me personally, would be Somerset. I think that there's differing opinions on that. I know the yearbook, thinks that they have a chance to compete due to depth right away. But if you watch enough or coach enough high school sports, losing 6 players that are competing almost all the time, especially in a game like basketball where it's 5-on-5, right? Having that replaced and expecting it to be smooth, it can be successful with the right kids, but expecting it to be smooth, especially in a conference like the Middle Border, where you are going to be playing against at least 4 teams a year that are very competitive. I just don't know that that's reality. I mean, you and I both were big fans of this team they had last year. I mean, Medina Ortiz is the smoothest point guard we've watched in the conference for a long, long time. And they had just a bunch of dynamic dudes, but it's really tough to lose that much talent. It's really hard.
Yeah, but at the same time, when you have a class like they had, what was behind them was one of those things that you don't necessarily see that often, right? Their JV was successful last year. Their JV2 was successful last year. They've won a game. They beat Barron last week. So I think that there is the potential for them to give teams, a challenging game every night, just because especially early, there's so much that's not known. In that game against Barron, they had a kid score 20.
Was that Lake DeYoung?
No, Savian Mull, a 5'10" senior. So not even someone that we had necessarily on our radar. Another senior, the young had 18, but the thing that stuck out to me was just looking at their personnel, and it doesn't necessarily show in that first game, but they have some recognizable last names like Caden Krybeck, that's a 10th grader. They started Gebheim, that's a senior this year, a 5'10" senior. And then they have a Gebheim that's 6'2", that's a sophomore. So I think that there's a bunch of guys there that Coach Wink just has to figure out how to get them to coexist. Now, do I think that means that they're going to win the conference? I don't. But I think they might be one of those sneaky good teams. I think they're at a different level than Amory. Obviously,
absolutely.
I think you do too. Would they have been my pick for 7th? I might have went with a different team. But I think that Somerset's going to be a 500 team just because Somerset's a really hard place to play. They're going to be able to run out a lot of dudes. They've done well playing up tempo, and they've done well playing in big games. And these kids have all been there to see it, not necessarily playing it. But all these guys have been around that program. And I think the program's really on its way up. And so, who's going to step up? Is it going to be this guy that scored 20? DeYoung, I think, is just a sophomore, a junior. He's a sophomore, 6'5" kid that's only going to get better. So I just think that they're going to have some talent that might sneak up and surprise some teams. And I don't know how good Barron's going to be this year, having lost the older Liberty. But I think that's a good test. But I put them, right around 500, maybe a game or two below in the conference. But I think that's kind of what they are, and maybe their ceiling's not much higher. But yeah, I mean, there are people obviously around that feel that they're going to be good when they're projected, in the yearbook to be a top 3 team.
Yeah, they're definitely not in the middle border. It's in the last 20 years, there's always a team that's threatening to get to state or gets to state. It's a good basketball conference. It's not quite on a basketball level what it is as a football conference, I would say, where, it's state or bust, really.
Right.
But one reason that I think Somerset will compete well, I look at the top, what I think, could be the top of the conference. And I just see a lot of older, mature, also very talented players on some teams with some coaches that have done it for a long time. And I guess that's more of why I'm leaning a little bit lighter on Somerset. But, Coach Wink has his work cut out for him. He's got a ton of young kids that are going to obviously be excited to play in bigger roles. And we'll see how they do. It'll be exciting. And from there on, and I would even lump Somerset into this, but there's like a middle ground. I think for me, there's a strong case for number 1, but there's like a middle 6 or 7 where it's not really disrespect on our part. It's just what's going to happen, right? There's pros and cons. And one team that I don't have a ton of experience with is Altoona. They're obviously in their first year in the Middle Border Conference for basketball. What do you see bringing back for them, coming off of a year where they were 16-8, 8-4 in the Clover Belt, and a good Clover Belt, and obviously made a good run?
Yeah, so Altoona's been kind of the team in the Clover Belt for the last handful of years. They lose a bunch. So Keyshawn Harris was the player of the year in their conference as a junior, and tore his ACL, didn't play as a senior. Braden Turk, my nephew, was the player of the year in the conference last year. And now he's graduated, as well as the third of those 3 amigos, Evan Moss, who was like a 6'4", kind of a 6'4" guard, like a small forward type guy, who averaged 14 a game. So those 3, had Keyshawn been healthy last year, I don't know that they were going to go down to by La Crosse, wherever they got drilled by. I'm drawing a blank. But they got beat pretty handily in the sectional semis. And so I don't know that their ceiling was much higher than that. The thing that's going to be a deal for them is their second best player that would have came back moved. And so I think that changes things. They had a physical kid named Glenn Sabini that was a good player. I mean, he would have been one of those guys in the middle board that you're like, yep, this is where he belongs. And he moved over to Milwaukee, and him and his brother. So they bring back 2 starters, Evan Peterson, who when they played Ellsworth in the regional final last year, him and Janke got into it, and it was a whole lot of fun. And so Evan's a good shooter, kind of streaky, but he's going to be their best player. And then Marston Salisbury was their point guard, who is also a senior this year. So I think that there's kids that have played. They bring back some other guys that were more bit players, but they have dudes that played in big games and have a history of playing in big games. And I think that's gonna help Altoona when they come over to the middle border. So I think if the way that you're working, you have them at 6. I would
Yeah.
put them higher.
Sure.
And more towards the, you talked about, there's a clear team at the top and a clear team at the bottom. I would put Altoona above 500 in the conference. And I think that there's going to be kids that come out and we're like, those are good basketball players just because of the proximity to Eau Claire, right? There might be kids that we've never heard of that all of a sudden are playing ball for Altoona that are decent. And I think that's kind of the ceiling for them. They end up, I think, getting pushed south in the regional, which is really, not beneficial to them. So I think, in my mind, it's going to be interesting just because they're going to have to take some bus trips. They're going to have to get acclimated to teams that they haven't played before, right? And so I think they're going to be okay. They have they have a 6'5" junior that I think will be okay. They have a couple, the Cole brothers, I think are going to be okay. But I would put them more towards that, upper part of our middle teams. And I think Evan Peterson is going to be an all conference player this year.
Yeah, and that's good info, good intel. I guess the reason that, with coming into the middle border, I guess we'll see. They're another team that loses. We talked in the girls preview about teams that still have talent but lose the primary talents on a team and how difficult that transition can be. That's a big question mark for me with them. And I also think that there's a lot of teams in the middle border that are going to be very excited to kind of welcome them into the middle border physically, because the Clover Belt's an interesting conference in that it's had a ton of high level success in Wisconsin high school basketball. I don't know if it's the same type. I know that a lot of teams like Regis trend towards lower divisions, which is not to say that it's a lesser thing to be successful, because Regis has been a powerhouse. And Altoona has been a powerhouse, and Altoona has competed with Baldwin Woodville for 2 decades almost now, on, different levels of the playoffs. I would, previewing the conference, I hope anybody listening knows I would love for any of these teams to make me wrong. I think it's not only is it awesome for them, but it's so fun to see those kind of stories. So it would be so cool for Amory or Somerset or Altoona. And Altoona for me is in, as I go through the teams 2 through 7, 2 through 6 more, could swap really either way. And that's similar for the girls in the middle border this year. And another team in that group for me is Osceola. And there's a lot of people that are going to put them right at the bottom with Amory and say there's no shot. But the interesting thing about Osceola basketball right now is that when you were a coach, the group of seniors that are seniors now, I think they lost 2 times as C teamers. I think they lost about twice when they were the primary JV. And then last year they were introduced to the middle border varsity level and didn't have a ton of success, right? In a good conference with a state semifinal representative in St. Croix Central and some other teams that had some really good years, and playing teams like New Richmond, it's a tough conference, right? But in football, coaching football, and you follow it very closely, there were not a lot of non-football people or just fans per se that thought they were going to do what they did. And the reason they did what they did this year is because of their senior class. Now, obviously, there's other pieces that help. Garrett Slater is a phenomenally talented athlete, and he's a huge deal for them. And he actually I think he got dinged during the football season, which hurt them. And he's going to be a big part of what makes them go basketball-wise. But I think, Charlie Tronrud, they've got a 6'6" kid that's he's a competitor. He's not a terribly talented kid, maybe basketball-wise, but he competes very hard. And I think they just have a bunch of kids that have played a lot of basketball together throughout the years, and they're kind of ready to make their mark like they did on the football field. So I there's a lot of people that aren't going to be putting a ton of money on Osceola. I'm going to put a little bit more than most. I think that they're going to do a really nice job and compete really well. I think they're going to beat teams in Osceola. Osceola is a sneaky place to play. People don't understand that. It's a weird gym. It's a lot. Oddly, it's a loud gym. It's enormous, but it's loud when the student section is right in the end, right on the baseline. It's a funky place to play. So anybody at any time can go in there and get a great game from Osceola. And so I think a lot more highly of them than maybe some will. But what's your thoughts on the Chieftains?
Yeah, I think you're higher on them than I am. And for all the reasons that you said, that team that people wouldn't be, right? They haven't had a lot of success at the varsity level. And I mean, that contradicts what I said about Somerset. But the difference is the kids that haven't played for Somerset or haven't won at Somerset were a part of that culture of winning. And now, typically, a successful fall bleeds into the winter, and that might help them. But part of me also wonders: do these kids have, like, are they football players that just are playing basketball during the winter, right? Are they exceptional athletes that lack some basketball skill? And I think Slater is a stud, right? I think, we talked about Evan Peterson being all conference. I think Garrett Slater is an all conference player as a junior. And Tronrud, he didn't look like himself last year. I don't know if he was injured or what. But I think that was a kid whose trajectory we thought was maybe going to be a little bit higher than what we've seen so far. I mean, he's a 3 points per game guy as a junior. But they do have some other pieces, and they did have success with their younger grades last year. I'm not there yet. For me, I would slot them at 7, right? In a different league than Amory, but a little bit below Somerset, below Altoona. And I like you said, we'd love to be proven wrong. I would. One of their assistant coaches, Greg Cumlin, was the player of the year, co-player of the year my senior year, and was a phenomenal player. He's obviously still involved in that program, and I would love to see them play well, right? And when Osceola basketball was making their run to state, which they did, I think in 2000, that was a weird place to be, right? For all the reasons that you mentioned, that the baseline, having kids on it, which we also see in Prescott, but they were a fun team to follow a little bit, and I think they've had success, and they've won games at the lower levels, but that's never translated yet to success at the varsity level. In the last 10 years or so. Not 10 years, because they were good 5-6 years ago. So for me, they're 7 for me. Could they be better? Absolutely. But I think, like you said, there's the middle of the pack, and they're certainly in it. But someone's going to be the last of that group, and that's just who I believe is going to be there.
Right. Yeah, you're 100% right. It hasn't translated. And I remember coaching C team against this group, and being just so impressed with how there wasn't a premier talent, but there was just such a kind of camaraderie between the kids, and they played super hard. I hope that can come out this year. We'll see. I think they'll be competitive. I think they're going to prove to put, there's going to be where Prescott goes to Osceola, or BW goes to Osceola, or Ellsworth goes to Osceola, and it's a 2-point game. Something like that's going to happen, because that's just the way that place goes, right?
Well, Osceola beat Prescott there last year.
Right. So, I mean, it's a tough place to play, and we'll see if their culture can kind of take a big step, like their football culture did, back towards what it was, for that number of years. And next up for me, kind of in that middle group, teams that are going to compete and could finish, 2 through 6, 2 through 5, is going to be Central, who comes off of a huge monster year, right? The best season of high school boys basketball they've had in my lifetime. And 23-3, 14-0 in conference, and really 14-0 in a in a manner that we have, once again, we really haven't seen since like a Nick Johnson Prescott team in 15 or 16, right? We're like, before the season, it's like, is it going to be Central or Richmond or who? And then they go to, or they host Richmond and beat them by literally 50 points. It was that kind of a year. And so they lose big pieces of that year. They also bring back a couple, but they lose Seiler, they lose Klin, they lose, Pettit. And so they bring back Hackbarth, they bring back a presence inside in Hinsman that is impossible to replicate, literally a Division I athlete. And Hackbarth's a elite shooter, one of the better 3-point shooters we've seen in a number of years in the middle border. But the reason and the reason I put them in the kind of the middle part and could trend higher, could trend lower, maybe, is what's Nielsen and some of the other pieces that have dominated, because their junior varsity has lost like 10 games in the last 3 years. They have been dominating on that level, but also, Klin, Seiler, Pettit, they've been taking up the varsity spot for the last 3 years. Mm-hmm. So there's been a lot of juniors on JV as it goes. And so it'll be interesting to see some of those juniors coming out to the big stage, how they can fit. Nielsen's already proven that he can play on the big stage in the middle border, but there's some other names that it'll be interesting to see. I don't think it's an unfair place to put them, just because you watch enough high school basketball, you understand how hard it is to repeat, let alone repeat after losing your three or your 4 best players, right? Yep. But what's your thought on the Panthers? I mean, they also lose legendary coach Randy Jordan, and his sidekick So
I have them a little higher. I think they'll finish in the top 3. And part of that is Colin Hackbarth did what he did really well and didn't really have to do more than that, right? Gabe Seiler made his teammates better, but Gabe Seiler would do anything. Mm-hmm. Right. And so what has to happen when Gabe Seiler's not present is other players have to expand their roles. And I think that Colin Hackbarth is going to do that, be more of a playmaker than just a scorer. I think Connor Nielsen is going to be a guy that we're like, geez, is he a double-double guy? Maybe not, because Carson Hinsman might get all the rebounds. Right. Mm-hmm. And then they have depth. I think the Whitaker kid's going to be good. Right. Mm-hmm. I think Mason Sullivan is going to be a player in time. I don't know if this is the year that it's like, oh yeah, he's a problem. But that's going to happen. And there's other names that you look at and you're like, oh man, another Pettit, right? When did Jackson Pettit become a dude as a junior? Well, Jeff Pettit is a junior. And so I think that there's kind of this reload mentality. And I don't know if that's the right word, because there's not Gabe Seiler, right? There's not another one. For a couple of years, till his brother's a freshman in 2 years. There's not Kelson Klin, right? Who's just that springy athletic type that really improved a lot from his junior senior year. But Jackson Pettit, in his 17 a game, it wouldn't shock me if Jeff Pettit was looking like that at some point, right? And I don't know if he's the same player, but the fact that they have that depth is going to be a problem. Now, obviously, Seiler, that's a huge deal. Pettit's a huge deal. Klin's a huge deal. But when you said Coach Randy Jordan's out, that to me is the huge mystery, because what did he do to that team defensively when he took over? Is he changed everything. And some of those kids have that kind of ingrained in them, that here's what we have to do defensively. And if they can still do that, great. But if that starts to drop off, they're not going to be what they were last year, that they can just kind of make up for that by Gabe Seiler getting to the rack, or, Pettit hitting a corner 3, or Klin, being in the short corner and just making layups. And so I said it last year, 18 months ago, if they stayed healthy, they were going to state last year, and they did. That's not going to be them this year, but could they win some games that you really didn't expect them to? I think not only can they, but they will. And that's why I put them at 3, maybe 2. But I think I'm a little bit higher on them this year than you are.
Yeah. It'll be interesting. Coaching changes are as a fan fun to watch, just because I can say it. I mean, watching Coach Jordan, what he did in 2 years is one of the cooler things I've seen in high school sports. Really.
Yep.
I will take the take that they would not have made it to state with the same talent as without Coach Jordan. It would not have been a pin and pop kind of, I don't believe that. I don't think, anybody could have taken those personalities and those and just made, kind of streamlined them the way he did. Because you take talent and you have success is one thing, but structuring it and molding it to have the most success,
right?
I think he did that in a way that was really, 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 really cool to watch as a young coach and a young fan. So
yeah, and I said to Coach Baumgart last year too, and it's no rip on Coach Turpin, who is a great guy, great coach, and is great at River Falls. But sometimes as a coach, you'd look down and you would be like, all right, advantage us, or this is gonna, this guy's not going to outcoach me. When I look down at Coach Baumgart for Barron, and I look down at Coach Jordan, and I'm like, oh, this isn't advantage Blackhawks. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just having respect for the guy that's been to state with multiple high school teams, multiple college teams. Like, yeah, he's the real deal. So that's going to be a big one for the Panthers. But I think personnel wise, they're going to be okay.
Sure. Yeah. And that's a fair take. That's a good take, I think. And looking at the top of the conference, it's fun. I think, you naturally ruffle feathers when you talk about who you think is going to take home the crown and who's not. But I'm just going to give my top 3.
Okay.
And no particular order, but we're going to talk about, I think it'd be fun to talk about Baldwin Woodville first.
Sure.
I think it's fun to talk about them just because, I mean, I love so many of those kids, coaching them in football for 4 years, coaching them, a couple of them, and then also coaching them in basketball. They're the best. I love seeing Keegan Offsey, love seeing Cam Thompson, love seeing Colin Fritz and Eli Coonan. And, those 4 names for me are what will determine the level of success. I think BW is a shoe-in to finish above 500, a shoe-in to be competitive in pretty much every game. Unless, really, I mean, they have everything that you could need. They have experience, they have depth, they have talent, they have speed, athleticism. But for me, what's going to be interesting, they last year losing DK, Dylan Caro, an elite shooter, an elite shot blocker, who led them in scoring last year, but returning Cam Thompson and Keegan Offsey and those, primary scoring points, along with Fritz a little bit. But, for the last couple of years, we've been thinking, or just talking about, with Keegan, with Cam, will there be a kind of a burst through to the, 15 or more points a game, right? And, that may happen. I don't know if it has to for either of them. I think that Cam is a high level perimeter defender that can defend the whole floor. I think Keegan is going to be the best defender in the conference. He athletically and explosively can do things that other people could train their whole life and they just couldn't do. Now, Keegan's also a good rebounder. But back to the scoring thing, I don't know that they will need to carry that load as much as people think. I think I think Eli Coonan and Colin Fritz are going to come on, and people that maybe don't remember those names from last year, I think they will. And it'll be interesting to see who fills the other spots, right? And, guys like Mason Werner, who had a great year on JV, Sean Van Someren, another good year on JV, and some sophomores that people don't really think maybe about a ton, but, James Borkhardt is a guy that I know is getting some significant varsity run. But, I'm a homer. I really hope that they do well. I really think they will. I think they have a chance to compete and beat any team in the middle border, and maybe any team in the middle border twice, depending on the situation in the night. But I know that you're in the same boat as me. It's going to be a ton of fun watching them play. It's going to be a ton of fun watching those kids that have worked very hard, leave it all out there on the floor.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the one thing I'm going to not do is put any expectation or here's what should happen, because that's not fair to anybody. What you said is completely true, right? On any given night, this team could beat anybody, and that's not a lie. Having coached the senior group as seventh graders, having coached them, some of these guys as sophomores, and seeing them in the gym every single day and over the summers, like it's hard to objectively weigh them against kids that you see twice a year, 3 times a year, see on film. But what I can tell you is what other people tell me, right? That watch them objectively against other people. Eli Kuna could be a significant problem for 6 other teams in the conference that don't have somebody as physically big as him, right? I see him in the hallway, and it's like every time I'm looking up higher, and that's crazy. He was overmatched against Carson Hinsman last year. Eli is significantly bigger, and I would assume significantly stronger than he was 12 months ago, right? That's going to be huge. If Eli is as good as I hear that he has looked, that's going to be really good for this team. Okay. Colin Fritz was super impressive to me last year as a freshman. Like just some of the things he did, it's like that's not what a typical 9th grader would do. Undersized, playing in the post, and he's still getting longer. Could he average 10 points and 8 boards? Certainly. Okay. What you said about Keegan, athletically super gifted. Keegan flipped a switch last year and became a threat from the perimeter and became like a 3-and-D type of guy, right? But we also know that Keegan is a freaky rebounder when he wants to be. Okay. So he can be phenomenal. Cam's going to have to be the guy that puts everybody in the right place, and he certainly can be. He was a very good scorer as a sophomore, averaged over 10 a game as a junior. Now, who fills in that 5th role? It could be a number of guys. Based on Mason Werner's fall, I would think that he could have a really good winter, right? Based on watching Sean Van Someren develop in the last handful of years, he could have a very good winter. Some of those seniors like Caleb and Caleb Locker and Sam Hush, they could take that next step, right? When you're a senior, it's different. And that's what we saw from Sam Hush on the football field. And so there's depth there. You mentioned some of the younger kids. That's all very possible, right? I think there's some underclassmen that are going to make a difference. So like I'm not going to put the expectation up that they should win X amount of games, right? I know in my head right. They could cause some problem for teams, and I think that's going to be fun. We're going to be in the gym announcing all the home games, but top half of the conference is not unreasonable, right? And how far you want to take them up, watch some games and form your own opinion. But for sure, it's going to be a fun year for the Blackhawks.
Yeah. They check too many boxes for me objectively. Obviously, it's like you said, it's hard always to be truly objective with kids that and have cheered for and have coached. But It's going to be fun calling their games and seeing what they do, especially on the big stage, especially early. I mean, they host Prescott, they host St. Croix Central. I mean, boom, boom, right? So it's going to be a test. They're in luck tonight, and they're having success in luck, and they're going to have success in luck, right? And they should. It'll be interesting, though. It'll be interesting to see. You welcome in Nick Johnson after he loses in your building for the first time in a long time. Maybe ever. And then you also welcome in a defending state semifinalist in Central. So it'll be fun. Another team, that I think, in that top three for me would be, the Ellsworth Panthers. I think that they are a team. I think that there are probably people that would think that they might be a bottom three team, people that maybe didn't watch a ton of Ellsworth basketball later in the year. Right. And also losing a guy like Mason Anderson, that's a tough thing to lose. Right. But Jack Janke, physically, and you can speak more to the skill aspects of being a point guard or just a 2-3, right? But athletically, Jack Janke is on a level that very, very few high school athletes in the Middle Border Conference have ever approached. Like in the sense of I literally have a hard time remembering Baldwin Woodville, the equivalent might be like a Travis Helland, right? Prescott might be a Petey Brookshaw, right? He can be unstoppable, like literally unstoppable in the paint, where he might follow you or you might follow him, but he is going to get his hand around the rim with the ball, right? And that's what's so fun as a fan is like, when Jack Janke's in the gym, it's like, what's he going to do? And he's a guy that, if Ellsworth didn't have Jack Janke, I don't know that they would be a top half of the conference team to me. But with him, he's a guy that, it's LeBron in the early Cavs, where it's like, yeah, they're the Cavs, but they have LeBron, right? And I'm a huge fan of what he's done on a lot of different aspects of high school sports with Ellsworth, leading them to the state finals in football and almost pulling off, a crazy upset there, dominating the conference for 2 years on the gridiron. And then last year, we got to see his metamorphosis in the BW gym where he just, flipped that switch. So I think Ellsworth's a real threat. They've obviously got, Spencer Schultz, who's played a ton of varsity minutes. There's a Coulthard that's going to come back and, play more varsity minutes. Be interesting to see how Coach Peterson handles Janke. I think there's obviously through the years, we've seen different talents and how those talents have been handled by coaches. It'll be interesting to see if he kind of lets the reins go and says, Jack, take us to the promised land, or if he tries to rein him in. It'll be interesting to see. What are your thoughts on Ellsworth?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be the Jack Janke show, as it should be, as it became last year in our gym, and then when they went to Altoona and played them really tough, he became basically in the span of a few weeks the most dominant kid in the conference. And CJ was in the conference at the time, and Mason Anderson was on his team. And Mason, who was a great player, great kid, just kind of deferred because he saw what we all saw, that Jack Janke, when he wants to do something, just did it. And I had officials call me after games, and they're like, we had the hardest time officiating because it's a foul every single time, because he draws contact. He's so strong. He finishes through contact. It's not unlike what Parker Nielsen did for Prescott. Mm-hmm. Right? I think Parker was probably the more natural basketball player.
Right.
Jack is like a combination of Parker and Joey Kidder. Sure. Where he's going to put himself in the right spot. He's going to do the right thing, and he's going to physically bully you while doing it. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's going to be so difficult for other teams if he's got, and he'll have off nights, and there's not really anybody there. Although Schultz had a huge game in that game against Altoona, hitting threes. I just don't feel good about anybody on that team picking up the slack if Janke goes as foul trouble. Like there's going to be officials that are really excited to throw up the charge call. Absolutely. And he gives that opportunity to do that, right?
Mhm.
There's going to be no calls where Jack Janke is not going to think it was a no call and let the official know it. He did that last year, right? He's a phenomenal player. The things that he does are going to be super fun to watch. And then there's going to be the dynamic between him and his coach, right? And if we took the poll of what coach is most likely to lose his mind and scream, Jordan Peterson's number one, right? I've known Jordan forever. He's a great dude, but he's very vocal, and sometimes players don't handle that real well, especially when players sometimes lose their cool too, right? So there's this dynamic where we don't know how it's going to go. Could Ellsworth win a lot of games? Absolutely. Could it go south in a hurry? Also could, right?
Absolutely.
But on this team that had a really, really fun fall, right? Jarrell Gooden was a good player on the football team.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't do a lot last year, but he'd come in and show some flashes. And I think that's Bo Hines listed as a newcomer, right? Bo Hines is super athletic. If they want to turn it up and go, there's speed in that room. So they're kind of an X factor for me as far as how high they go. On the right night, it could be the very top. On the wrong night, it could be 7, right? And I don't know that there's any other team that has that ceiling to that floor. But I'm looking forward to December 17th. They're coming to our place. Assuming there's no girls game that night, I'll be there. So it should be good. They're going to be the kind of the X factor in the conference.
Yeah. They're it's going to be fun. I mean, it's going to be so much fun watching Jack, seeing what level his game approaches. Obviously, early they're going to be a group that maybe is a little bit rusty, maybe doesn't quite hit the ground running. As they've been playing. A lot of their important players have been playing a tough physical sport, and Jack obviously, finishing the season at State with playing against some physically dominating players in Catholic Memorial. Definitely, even a couple weeks later, still feeling it probably, but I think that I think that they possibly could hit a stride that, when it comes to Jack and how they go, that's pretty cool. That could be pretty successful. And I think there's one team left that we haven't talked about, and that'd be the Prescott Cardinals, right?
Right.
And you want to lead us off with what you think Coach Johnson and Prescott are going to do?
Well, last year, 11-10 overall.
Right.
Down year in Prescott. The one senior that they had that they start coming into the year, Walker Lenz, was hurt quite a bit. And as a team, wildly inconsistent, right? Puts up 90, I think, against Mondovi and seems to have all the problems solved, and then goes on a stretch where they lose a few games in a row to, a game to Osceola, who just wasn't great last year. But I think the mark of a really young, inexperienced team is inconsistency. Led by last year as a sophomore, Jordan Malmov, who averaged 22 a game. Okay. Malmov, who was the 6th man on a team that was going to make a run, potentially down to Madison. And kind of had the deal where things I don't think were great because he had never been the man, and now people were really focused on him being the man. And he wasn't getting the shots that he was getting the year before because he wasn't the man then. Parker Nielsen was the man. Jacob Dolphin was the man. And so he's going to be, in my mind, Jack Janke's going to be the player of the year, right? And Malmov is not going to get it because he's a junior, but very well could be that player of the year. Aiden Russell, who is a senior, who wasn't great last year on the basketball court. Had a phenomenal fall, and from what I understand, has been all in on basketball. Super athlete, is going to be the guy that doesn't necessarily score a ton, but is the answer for some of those physical freaks from the other schools, like Jack Janke, right? Now, I'm not saying Aiden Russell's going to stop him, but he's a good one to put on him and say, okay, here's how we're going to combat that. Ben Roll was one of those kids that made shots. The Seaford kid, another kid that made shots. Dallas Wallen, as a freshman last year, came out and was like a double machine. And he's only going to be better, only going to be more experienced. Him and Colin, in my mind, are the neck and neck for the best sophomore in the conference. And I think that's kind of where you look at this team and you say, man, they didn't lose a whole lot, right? They lost Walker Lenz 6 points a game, but they bring back all the other players. And that, to me, is where they got to be the favorites, right? How are they going to be underneath? That could be a problem with some teams that have big dudes like Hinsman, like Eli. And so this isn't like, crown them like we would have done every other year in the past, with the exception of last year. But there's some question marks, but there's also the potential that this could be the Prescott of old, which is scary for other teams.
Yeah. You mentioned, a ton of names there that are super important for them. One thing that I think is interesting, with a culture like that, with a tradition like Prescott Hoops has now, these kids, when you have a coach like Coach Johnson, who winning percentage wise is probably unprecedented in the conference history. He's won on a ton of different levels as a player and as a coach. And so, coaching in high school, obviously it's very important, but you just imagine that in a gym where he's the coach, there's not a lot of other opinions that matter, not a lot of other takes that matter. It doesn't matter what talent you have. And that's been the cool thing getting to know Coach Johnson, is that he's had the most talent in his gyms over the last handful of years. And his voice and his opinion and his coaching has reigned supreme. And that's just such a huge testament to him. And so the reason that it's hard to pick against them to at least be near the top, if not at the top, is because irregardless of the talent he has, which he does have some significant talent, a lot of young talent, that he's going to get them to operate kind of like we talked about, or like I talked about with Coach Jordan. He's not only going to get them to operate well, he's going to get them to operate as well as they possibly could. I really do believe that about him. And I think that he does things at a level that the middle border hasn't seen, maybe, definitely since I've been around. And yeah, it's going to be fun because obviously, talent wise, it's, what Malmlob can do. We watched from, 20 feet away as when he as a freshman came in with Parker and Doffing and what did he have in the first half? He had double digits, like 18 in the first half, something like that.
The original final game at Somerset.
Yeah.
He had 18. I think he had 6 threes.
Yeah. And so he's going to keep shooting and keep making shots. Wallen's kind of a fun player to watch just because he's lanky, he's tall, he grabs a rebound and gets every putback, right? He had a game-winning putback last year for him. How those other pieces fit, Benny Roll, the real nice Mike linebacker for him, Aiden, coming, and some other pieces. But I think the biggest deal is going to be the biggest deal once again for Prescott, and that's Coach Johnson. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to be a Prescott basketball fan.
Yep. The thing that is going to be interesting, and this is just, in my head, and now I'm saying it out loud. Nobody's told me this or, have shared these thoughts with me, but they won 7 straight conference games or 7 straight conference titles. Didn't hardly lose any conference games. Then you have a year that, I mean, a down year for Prescott, but a significantly worse year for Prescott. There are a number of people out there that truly believe that they know basketball just as well as Coach Johnson, that have watched him for 1 year, go 500, and now are convinced that they are smarter than him. Right? That's how watching sports works. Right? The football coach calls a wrong play on a Sunday, and all of a sudden the people on their couch are like, if I would have called the play, we would have won. Right? That's not necessarily how this works, but that's how society works. And so they're playing right now. They beat New Richmond, right? They beat New Richmond, and New Richmond, I think, is going to be okay. They would be a middle of the road to top half threat in the middle border, who's picked to finish last in the Big Rivers.
Right.
And so now they're playing Durand, who is going to be a good team. And
Yep.
if they lose one, right, there's going to be people, because there always are, that are going to think that he's just not getting it done, which is preposterous, but also true. Like that they'll think that. And so that to me is kind of the one unknown in Prescott. It's not because they're not well coached, because they are. It's not because they don't have good athletes, because they do. It's not because they don't have skilled basketball players, because they have that too. It's how is this community going to work if they're 3-3 at some point, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's going to be kind of, this evolving dynamic that could certainly happen. And it all remains to be seen, right? We're just two crazy people that talk about basketball. And people are like, these guys are crazy. They don't know what they're talking about, which is totally fine, right? They hit play, not us. So that's what we have for the middle border. Is there anything else you want to talk about? We're, I don't know if we're at an hour or what we're at right now, but
yeah. No, I think this is probably a good place to bookend it. We'll probably highlight some other. Hopefully, we'll have some conversations with some coaches coming up. Maybe Coach Campbell at River Falls, who comes off of a state berth last year. Maybe some others. But yeah, I mean, it's knowing the middle border best. I think it's a good thing to kind of cover that, and we'll see what else kind of comes into play.
Yeah. So this was Thursday. Excuse me. This was Tuesday. I might have said Thursday earlier. Did I say Thursday earlier?
I don't remember.
Okay. Well, it's definitely Tuesday. It's always been Tuesday today. We're going to have BW Prescott on Blackhawk TV Friday night. It'll be a fun one. I even ordered some new microphones so we can make sure that people can hear us clearly. But that's it for episode 2. This was the Middle Border basketball preview, Western Wisconsin Sports Podcast, Season 2, Episode 2. Anything to say? Or are we going to sign off?
We're signing off.
We're signing off. Have a wonderful night. We'll be back next week for more. So long.